but the mic to Kate and Eleanor, who are going to wrap us up with a Q&A session.
Yes, absolutely. Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Simon. There's a lesson there for all of us not to suggest a panel unless you're prepared to chair it. The wonderful thing about coming on last, of course, is that we get to sort of have a really good overview of the day's session and, in some ways, have our own last words, but give those of you left also the chance to have your own last words. And for me, I'm always really proud to be involved particularly in the UK IGFs, because there is such a great level of participation from so many different types of people with different opinions. And I know we had some discussion this morning in the session about, how do we get more people who disagree with us to sit in a room and talk with us about this stuff. But actually, here today, I've heard some really good balanced opinions in all of the sessions that I've been on. And I think it, really does promote a good sort of open forum for debate. We've had some old conversations, the cybersecurity, IPv6, the same old conversations, but I think there's been new ground in those conversations today. And some new conversations as well. It's nice to actually be talking about something new for a change. IANA, net filtering, as much as it irks me. At least we are having now, it is a discussion in its own right, and not just part and parcel of cybersecurity. So that's kind of also a good movement for me. So the last 15 minutes, we do still want you guys to sort of have your input and have your say, but I'm here with Ellie Bradley, who's the COO for Nominet, and we're just going to have a bit of a discussion between us and pull up some of the things that we've sort of picked out as the sort of takeouts. And in everything that we say in this last session, I'd like you all to sort of have in mind that we're looking for some outputs here. We're looking for some, again, it's lovely to hear your opinions, but now's probably, not the time for lengthy opinions and sort of soapboxing to an extent, but actually just coming up with some sort of solid suggestions what we go forwards to the international IGF with our ideas and thoughts. So first of all, Ellie, thank you very much for joining me. What do you think has been the main sort of messages that you've got from today's session?
Okay, well, I'd certainly take us back to the first session this morning and what we heard from that panel, which was, very much that post-Snowden, post-Net Mundial, the high-level government group last week, and indeed we heard it reaffirmed very much by the Minister that internet governance is absolutely centre stage at the moment. And, we have great examples of really strong multi-stakeholder dialogue. But I think we also probably heard a challenge as well this morning, which, talking about outcomes, is how do we create something tangible? So how do we ensure that we have that level of engagement and that we engage with a broader range of stakeholders and perhaps those that don't share the same views as us, but also how do we get to something tangible? And I just suspect that at this late hour in the day, we won't necessarily answer that question, but as a principle, how do we ensure that fora like this are not just about talking, but are actually about action as well? So I think that was something is perhaps a challenge to all of us in the room.
It's funny, I heard several times in that session different sort of derivations on the word multi-stakeholder, and it's getting longer and longer. Multi-stakeholderism, multi-stakeholderization. But again, it's a really valid conversation, which is kind of a new conversation. It's actually beginning to hone down what that means and how we can actually use that as a mechanism for coming to some conclusions rather than just talking around in a big circle.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what do you think then needs to be the important things that we need, the messages that we need to deliver when we're going into, apart from that multi-stakeholder side of things, what do we need to deliver going into the IGF?
Okay, I think it has to be outcome focused. So how are we actually going to promote the development of the internet, secure, ensure things like enhanced safety online, the security of users, how do we bring more people online, but also how does UK IGF fit in that broader framework, and what role do we want to play as we kind of enter a new phase and have a sorry. Should we start again? But really, I think, so just to start that comment again, just to think about what role the UK IGF has, and going back to that point about engaging with a broader range of stakeholders and a range of stakeholders that don't necessarily share our opinion, or certainly come from a different starting point. What role might we play? And perhaps that's one where other participants here today will have a perspective on. But how do we actually join up the dots between the broader IGF conversations, UK IGF, and that broader set of stakeholders?
At this stage, if anybody feels like they want to sort of jump in with comments at this stage, just do go ahead. Yes, please. If we can get a microphone down to the front row, that would be brilliant. I actually was surprised that there was less of a sort of a heated debate about net neutrality as well. You know, it did seem very civilised this morning, which is unusual for that topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think in terms of multi-stakeholderism, I think one of the things that IGF suffers from, and ChildNet have done a remarkable job in this area, is actually getting youth involved in actually the debate and getting the feedback of young people from all sorts of cultures involved. We've seen what I would deem some tokenism at various events, but I think that's a very powerful aspect of multi-stakeholder engagement that's key. And the voice of young people who are the digital natives, who live and breathe this kind of stuff. And I think something that the IGF process could benefit from is greater engagement. I know ChildNet is not this year doing anything, I think, on youth through lack of funds, and that's a shame, because I think the reality is that that young people's voices are really important in this debate, not just as a policy level, but internationally.
We are actually speaking about possibly doing a crowdfunding campaign to try and get the youth delegation along in the end, but we're going to be talking about that with ChildNet next week. So if that happens, I will be calling on all of your support to get those children out to the event. Another question at the back.
Hi. It's been interesting talking about multi-stakeholder forms of discussions all morning, because clearly we have some examples in the UK. We have the UK multi-stakeholder group on internet governance, which focuses more on the global internet policy discussions. Then we've got things like the IWF, where there's engagement with stakeholders, and there's various other topics we discussed. But there doesn't seem to be a sort of systematic approach to multi-stakeholder engagement, or a sort of place where the stakeholders gather, except for this UK IGF. And to me, that's an interesting thing that we should think about. In other places like Brazil, for instance, or Lebanon, as of 2 weeks ago, they created a specific multi-stakeholder setup. In Brazil, it's called CGI, where in Brazil, it's benefited from being, I think, 6 or 7 years old, where stakeholders meet regularly, and then from that regular forum, they can go off and work on issue-specific matters and try and solve them. So it could be, for instance, on the IWF track, or it could be on privacy, or it could be on filters. But we don't seem to. It seems to be very ad hoc, if you see what I mean. So I'm not in favour of formalising anything or creating a new body or anything like that. But maybe we can sort of build on the UK IGF to have more of a systematic approach to multi-stakeholder dialogue, which might help us make sure that we do capture all the right stakeholders when we are in discussions. So just a thought to try and think about, both to feed into the global IGF, but also to think about how we do it in the UK as well. Can we have a more systematic approach to multi-stakeholder dialogue on internet policy issues?
Would you agree, Ellie? I mean, is it a question of maybe formalising the output? Because I think we have a very good multi-stakeholder contribution here, but maybe it's down to formalising the output a bit more.
Yes, I mean, I think absolutely that has got to be desirable. But also, you know, it's interesting to hear about other fora where it's perhaps working better, or where we can learn from. And it might not mean more structures or more formalisation within the UK mechanisms, but actually the opportunity to see how others are doing it and learn from that.
And talking of formalisation, I do want to touch on the high-level government meeting in London. Was that useful? Can you give us any sort of insights from that? Because I know you were at it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, by its very nature, it was a pity it was one set of stakeholders represented in the room, but the fact that there was essentially endorsement for the outputs from Net Mundial, I think, is a very positive outcome, and the fact that that then could feed strongly, and the messaging could feed strongly from that into ICANN London, was really positive. And the sense, I think there was a sense of there is this impetus for change, and that was a key message that was coming out of that meeting. So, in general, pretty positive.
And of course, Mr. Vasey is always jolly good value in these meetings, isn't he? He's always got something interesting to say. How about
holding participants to account? Certainly.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Okay, well, let's talk about. Does anybody else want to touch on that before we move on to the workshop sessions? So we had 3 workshop sessions. Obviously, we couldn't be in all of them. Personally, I attended the cybersecurity breakout session, and you know, again, it was good from my perspective to see this. Similar conversations. We've had these conversations before, but they're beginning to evolve, and they're beginning to sort of take shape into something, you know, a little bit more than just sort of Edward Snowden, or, you know, sort of. I think we're beginning to think more about the broader implications. And for me, the things that came out of our session today were really that. I'll echo actually what Louise said about the legislation, that we need to think of a way for legislation to move as quickly and change as quickly as the criminality changes, because at the moment, you know, it does seem that that the law is sort of almost chasing its tail when it comes to trying to catch up with the cyber criminals. But also it's really about education rather than legislation, because an analogy that kind of hits the spot for me is that the internet is full of really dark places, and you can't police really dark places. You need to put up streetlights, and educating the children and the parents and, you know, everybody about how they can keep safe on a low level. Then hopefully, and I know that there was some discussion about the fact that the Snowden revelations have made everybody now so aware of, you know, sort of government spying that's becoming very difficult for the security forces to do their work. But hopefully, if we can free them up from the small stuff, because now so many people are taking care of themselves and aware of the fact they need to take care of themselves. I think awareness is becoming more prevalent now, but we still need the education to back that up, because people want to do something about their own safety online, but they don't know how to, and the systems are still too complex. So that's what really were the main takeouts for me from the cyber security.
Yeah, I just add to that. I think as well as education for children and families, there's also a real need to educate SMEs about some of the risks and challenges that they face. And I don't want to plug it, but one of the things that we're doing at Nominet is a pilot into a cert for small businesses, to see if there's a demand to actually provide educational material for SMEs to help them make good decisions and to help them deal with cyber security issues. So I think it goes beyond the home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody needs to be thinking about it. And my grandmother asked me about firewalls the other day. She's 95 years old, so I'm kind of pleased about that. Okay, now I know that you got the long straw and were lucky enough to go to the IPv6 meeting.
Sorry, to the very interesting panel that actually did this session. Absolutely fascinating. I know that IANA and cybersecurity issues are probably the sexy topics. IPv6 was really interesting, though, and I think the major. I mean, we heard some a really good summary of the session earlier on. But the two things I would just mention were we saw some great tools for actually measuring adoption and take-up of IPv6, and that was really helpful, I think, in maybe actually establishing the scale of the issue in certain countries. But also the other takeaway I had from that was very much that it used to be all about the hurdles that would prevent take-up of IP version 6. It's now potentially more about the opportunities for people who can now adopt it, and actually that sticking with IP4 is not without significant costs. So I thought, and I asked at the end, was the message one of optimism or pessimism? And I think generally there was a real sense of optimism, and that hopefully things will look different in a year's time.
No, agreed, and definitely. I mean, I think of all the conversations, I know I sort of teased a little bit there at the beginning, but of all the conversations we've been having for a number of years, I think IPv6 is really one of the ones that's come the longest way in the overall scheme of things. Okay, anybody else on the workshop sessions got anything else that they want to add that hasn't already been sort of covered in the summary sessions or our discussion so far? Excellent. So we can move swiftly onwards. And of course, the last thing that we've spoken about today is net filtering. So, and you know, this is all very fresh in everybody's minds. So, Ellie, from the last sort of half an hour of conversation, what were the key takeouts for you from that session, and what would we like to see as outputs moving forwards?
I suppose the one thing that I would say, and I put my hand up and said that I would be happy to have a conversation about this later this year at the IGF meeting, because I think that's absolutely what it's about. It's about having a discussion. It's about acknowledging that it's not right yet, but that we have to talk about the issues. And so that for me was you know, I think it's really helpful to have that debate, really helpful to acknowledge where the problems lie, but also I don't think we should be ashamed of actually having that discussion. So I mean, that was the main thing for me.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting how those discussions are shaped around the IGF coming up and the role, because of course we now are able to play a role of actually having a model that we've got some research and some data from. So as much as it pleases us or displeases us, you know, at least we're beginning now to speak from a position of knowledge rather than
I think that's absolutely key.
Fear and hyperbole, which has been in the past. So we are now reaching the end. I mean, I think we're like 4:05. So
we are.
We're due to finish at 4 o'clock. So if nobody else has anything to contribute, I would like to just say a few thank yous. Thank you all for participating in the discussion. You're of course encouraged to email your thoughts into the UK IGF so that we can include anything we've missed in our outcomes going forwards. Thanks to our many panellists and moderators for coming over for the day and participating, to Nominate for sponsoring the day, and for the ISOC for the remote participation, and to all of you for watching. Hi there. And of course, in his absence, the Minister for taking the time out of his busy schedule to address us and keep us all entertained this morning and updated on what's going on in his side of things. So thank you very much indeed, those of you that are still here, and I look forward to seeing you all at the IGF. Thank you.